for doing this, and to IT and Megan and Robin for setting this up again, because last time I thought it went really, really well. I understand one of our counselors who has been known to go sideways on occasion now has a laptop and will be joining us upside up today. So with that being said, I will call the meeting to order. Would somebody please be so kind, just to reiterate a couple of things here. Please, I encourage you not to use the chat line. And I would also suggest that if you do, you need to address all of council. I think there's probably something inherently wrong with carrying on any kind of debate or discussion about an item on the table between councillors, but I'm sure you're all aware of that. But anyway, so please, by a show of hand, if you want to go in queue, I'll do my best, and maybe Ms. Williams will, if I miss somebody, she'll give me a heads up that I missed somebody. And certainly for the voting, it'll be a show of hands on the screen. So I appreciate that. Anyway, I think I saw Ralph willing to make a motion to approve the agenda. Is there a seconder for that? Thank you, Dave. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Any disclosures of interest based on the relatively brief agenda before you? We have the minutes from our April 6th, 2020 Council Committee meeting. Is there somebody willing to make a motion to accept those minutes? Moved by Jay, seconded by Dave. Any further discussion, errors, or omissions noticed in those minutes? All in favor? Carried. Thank you. There are no closed session items today, and there are no consent items today. We do have a couple of board reports. If I didn't do it earlier, a warm welcome to those watching. I think I did do that. And we have a short agenda for you today, but there are certainly a number of aspects of city business that continue to move forward, and you'll be introduced to a few of them in the next few minutes. So first of all, the board report. This is with respect to the reconstitution of our Parking Advisory Committee that had their first meeting, I think, January 16th of this year, or at least in January, might have been January 20th, somewhere around there. And who is going to introduce this particular? And Councillor Tim is going to introduce this. So Tim, the floor is yours. Please and thank you.
Thank you, Steve. This is the as advertised terms of reference for the new Parking Advisory Committee. They actually met in February 25th. It has been reconstituted and includes veterans Alan Francis and Mike Knight, and we've got some new blood in Jamie Mask, who is the citizen at large, and Michael Fredson, who is, of course, the owner of Manticore downtown. So it's pretty simple, it's pretty short, and if anybody's got any questions about it, I believe there's no surprises, but I will try and answer those questions.
Thank you. I just received notice that I am a grandfather again. So forgive me responding to that, because I think it's generally unacceptable. But the father is not disclosing the gender of the baby because mom had a C-section, and she wants to share in the joy of announcing him or her in a little while. Anyway, Tim, thank you very much for that. You're right. I don't think there were a lot of surprises in there. But I will now entertain questions and discussion around the Parking Advisory Constitution Bylaw. In that case, I will ask Robin to put the motion on the screen. Is there a mover? Sorry, maybe I'll read it now, then ask for a mover in a second. Then I can remove it from the screen and accept the paper copy. That this committee recommends to the council that is recommended in the report Park 2001, aptly named, dated March 6, 2020, from the Parking Advisory Committee, Chapter 111 of the City of Orillia Municipal Code, Parking Advisory Committee be adopted and set out in schedule as set out in Schedule A of the report. I will now ask for a paper copy for that and ask for a mover and a seconder to put that on the floor. Moved by Rob. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Jay. Let's get the paper copy too. Thank you. The questions, comments? So I have it moved by Rob, seconded by Jay. I've read the motion and I'll accept conversation. Tim.
Sorry, Steve, if I could just point out one item in the report. I am the chairman of that committee, which I accept is not the most ideal situation. But in the inaugural meeting, because we had some new blood and everybody was just getting their feet wet again, they decided, or they asked me to be the chairman until such time as somebody feels like stepping up and replacing me. So that will probably happen within this year.
That's you make a good point, Ted. So Tim, they wanted to go to the tried and true. I got that. The one thing in the report you'll remember that talked about were some relatively minor remuneration for members of the committee and a little extra for the chair. But as a member of council, the public should be aware that that would not apply to you. Any other questions, comments, or discussion? I will now call the question. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Rocket, might you have a pen? Sorry. I'm Sunday ink. I got it. Thank you. I think I know why it was there. All right, that's two. All right, I'll sign that later. Okay, we are now on to council referrals. This is with respect to a motion I believe that Jay brought forward and later in the year last year with respect to calming measures and a potential deployment on four streets in Orillia. We've seen the report, but I think what I'll do, Jay, is I'll entertain the resolution and I'll get you to speak to it if you wish.
Just to clarify, Steve, did you want me to put forward the motion? To clarify, Steve, did you want me to put forward the motion at this time?
Sorry, Jay, just give us a moment if you don't mind. Sorry, thank you. So the motion is on the screen. Is there a mover and a seconder to get that on the floor for discussion? I understand there might be a potential change of direction by Jay. So just keep your hand up if you're a mover or a seconder, and I'll find you. Keep your hand up if you're a mover and a seconder. Thank you, Mason. A seconder. Thank you, Pat. That this committee recommends the council further to the report DSC 2012 dated April 14th, 2020 from the Development Services and Engineering Department staff be directed to forego traffic calming policy 2.6.1.1 and implement flexible centerline signage at Emperor Drive, Skyline Drive, Cleaner Drive, and Alexander Road, and the cost of $24,185 be allocated from the traffic calming capital project, and that traffic and parking regulation bylaw number 200755 be amended to include seasonal parking restrictions along Emperor Drive. And Jay, now, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, thanks very much, Steve. Yeah, just through the chair, I'm going to put forward a postponement motion today to postpone this item till the next meeting. There are certain specifics that are included in option 2 that I think we need to revisit. And so I want to work with staff a little bit more before we kind of come out with both options so that we can kind of come up with a more viable solution. And so I'm going to be asking council to delay it for the next 2 weeks.
Thank you very much. I'll entertain your motion to defer after we're satisfied that we've had a good discussion. Mason.
Yes, through you, Mayor Clark. Along the same lines as Councillor Fallis, I would like to see this postponed into the future, deferred a bit. I personally think, kind of the further out the better, whether it be, 3 months or 6 months. I personally don't see this as a priority right now to discuss this particular item. Being one of the folks who did bring it up and bring it forward, I think it's important that we do fix this issue in the future, but I don't think the issue is quite as prominent at the moment due to all the things going on with the pandemic and everything. I think it's something that can be set on the back burner for a little bit.
Thank you very much. Further discussion, Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Reading the report and everything else, I have a problem with even going ahead with this at this time, and I'll support the motion to go further, but the $19,000 maintenance fee every year, that creates a problem for me, and maybe we could look at that before you bring it up the next motion, why it's so expensive and that.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to see which staff person Ian is. I'm just trying to find him on the screen. Yeah, there he is. Sorry, Ian. I see your name. I don't see your face made for TV. But anyway, if you would be so kind as to address Ralph's question around the maintenance costs.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Hopefully you can see me now. So the maintenance costs we derived through consultation with some of our partner municipalities who have tried these signs out in other locations, as well as our own Environmental Services and Operations Department for the cost of sign installations in the city of Orillia. So the signs themselves, when they're bolted into the asphalt in the middle of a roadway, there's special working conditions you have to set up to install them and to do maintenance on them, because there's traffic control when you've got working in a live roadway. So that pushes up some of the costs. There's the sign purchase costs initially, and then the reports we're getting from our other municipalities that have them are saying that they are attending these signs about once per month to do maintenance, repairs, reinstallations, because they get damaged, they get knocked by vehicles, they get pushed off their mounts, and they have to redo all that kind of thing. They also tend to collect some sand and garbage and other things that blow around them, so that has to be cleaned off periodically.
Okay, thank you. Pat. There we go. Ralph, thank you.
So are the signs removed in the wintertime? What happens with snow removal?
Mr. Sugden?
Mayor Clark, yes, the signs are removed at the end of each fall season before winter operations commence, so that they don't interfere with snow removal.
Great, thank you. Any further questions, comments, discussion? Tim?
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Just a question. I'll support the postponement for sure, but I did have a question that I couldn't quite sort out. And I'm a little confused about the 85th percentile. And I wonder if somebody could just run through that equation just so that I understand it just a little bit better.
Mr. Sugden, I think this is going to fall back on your lap.
Yeah, I'll certainly take a stab at it. I'm not a statistician by any means, but basically that means 85% of the people are driving at the posted speed limit or less.
Thank you both. Ted?
Thank you, Mayor Clark. If I may, through you, a question to Councillor Follis. I'm curious as to what you are contemplating discussing with staff has the potential of altering the warrants as described in the report. At this point in time, the warrants on all 4 streets don't come anywhere close to warranting this kind of traffic calming. And it would be my normal response here to say we don't need to put bureaucracy and things of that nature in our city if in fact they will not make a contribution. And there was some particularly stressful news in the fire service report. So my inclination at the moment would be to vote against this resolution. I don't mind delaying it, but if we're just delaying it because for some reason other than that the report will be substantively different in terms of that measure, then I won't be in favor.
Great, thank you very much. Any further? Okay, I got Jay, then Tim.
Through the chair, I just thought I'd answer Councillor Eamon's question there. Yeah, there's some specifics just around the number of the signs that this initial option 2 is being proposed or is proposing. It's very, my initial reaction is there's some differences between what's been done in Severn and other examples of pilot projects counter to this one. And I think there's certainly some specifics we can work out to find that balance between cost and safety. And I think that's really the priority. Yeah, I'm hoping later on in the week to through telephone discuss some of the different options that might substitute for what's being proposed in this particular report. So we do have 2 options that are an alternative that's at least maybe a bit more doable within our city. Thanks.
Again, just for those at home, this report has enshrined within it 3 potential options. One was to receive it as information, which essentially makes it a non-actionable item. And I think that's Councillor Eamon's or Ted's point, is that the data collected by the engineering department showed that those 4 areas didn't come close to meeting the warrants and requiring these methods. But Councillor Follis has put forward option 2, which would action the item, and is now, of course, asking for a deferral. Any further discussion or questions? Tim, sorry. Thank you.
Sorry, Steve. So just thanks to Ian for that very simple answer on my 85th percentile. But what's confusing me is there's a bullet under option 1, and it says, and I'll just read it. It says each roadway has an 85th speed percentile within the desirable range. And it says 85th speed percentile is defined as the maximum speed that 85% of the drivers were driving. And then they give an example. On Collegiate Drive, 85% of the drivers were driving 53 kilometers an hour. Now the speed limit's 50. But so I'm not sure what I'm missing there. If the speed limit's 50 and they're saying 85% of the drivers were driving 53K, I'm not getting it.
Yeah, well, when I read I'll let Mr. Sugden weigh back in, but I think there's an acceptable range within right around the 50-kilometer posted limit in this example. In a different example, it would be a different speed limit potentially, but and that the data shows that 85% of the drivers, or 85% of the time, people were driving within that limit, and I think it went from like about 49 to 53, so right around the 50-kilometer zone. mark. And I think the other streets were somewhat similar. One was even lower than that as the average, the 85% average speed, or the speed that 85% of the people went 85% of the time. Mr. Sugden, anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Clark, I certainly, Councillor Lowers picked up on the details that are further enhanced in the report or contained in the report. My answer was perhaps an oversimplification of it. So what we found was 82% of the people were driving 52 or 50 kilometers an hour or less on those roads that are posted at 50 kilometers an hour. The 85th percentile is further explained under option 1 in the report, which is, as Councillor Lauer noted, is that most of the people are driving 53 kilometers an hour or less. 82% of the people are driving 50 kilometers an hour or less. So there's just a slight difference in how I explained it and how it's noted in the report. It's a clustering of all of the data gathered. So we had a range of speeds traveled on each of the roadways, most of them under or within the posted speed limit, small amount over, and then a very small amount hit some unacceptable speeds on those roadways.
Okay, thank you.
Good, thank you. Ralph?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like I said earlier, I have a little bit of a problem with the cost of this thing. And I want to thank staff. It's a very, very detailed report. I'm sure that they spend a ton of time on this. And I think unless Councillor follows, I'll support the delay for a couple of weeks or months, whatever is necessary. But to go to that expense when the majority of the people are adhering to the limit, I find it hard to spend that kind of money for this kind of thing. But like I said, if there's a different way that Councillor Follis can come up with staff, by all means. But I think Ted said it and somebody else said it as well, is I don't want to see staff spend a lot more time. We have more important things at this time in our lives to deal with than a speed limit that's adhered to by 85% of the people.
Thank you very much. Rob?
Thank you, through you, Mayor Clark. Just maybe a question, maybe we should be putting some of this items on the, if we're looking at traffic calming or even kind of some enforcement measures, maybe it should be coming toward the police service board and getting a report from the detachment commander to say, if we can get a little more enforcement in that area, and this would certainly save a little more staff time, and we wouldn't have to follow through the report to do any kind of traffic calming measure and just use more of a hotspot for the police to take a little more advantage of. With the detachment going to be in that area, it might deter some of the speeding moving forward.
Thank you. I believe that a police intervention would be an example of traffic calming. This particular report shows that 85% of the time people are well within compliance. But certainly there were appears to have been a few characters that went through at a significant speed, and would certainly like to have the police there when they went through tripping the radar. Further discussion, Pat?
And from the study that we did, we must have some idea of when the speeding is happening. And so that would be when the time that we would like to have the police out sort of doing the checks. Would that be appropriate?
I think if there are problematic times of the day in an area of the city that have been identified, I know in the past that request has gone out to the OPP, but I think it's often when we have some data from the city showing that it is indeed an issue. Any further questions, comments, considerations? Okay, I've heard two requests for a deferral. I've heard two different timeframes mentioned, so I don't know if it's the same deferral motion. Jay, you were looking, I believe, when we spoke a little earlier, to defer for a couple of weeks. So about May 4th, as I recall. Do you have a seconder for that? Okay, I've got a seconder in Dave, or Tim or Rob. All right, any further discussion on the potential postponement? So, Mason.
Yes, through you, Mayor Clark. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think that this particular item is a priority at the moment. I'd like to see it deferred a little bit longer. I definitely think it's worth discussing more and hopefully moving towards a solution. But I don't think at our next meeting is a good probable time. I think it would be a little bit better to have it further down the road, whether that be 3 months or 6 months. Hopefully not longer than that, but that kind of depends on this pandemic. But I'll go with the will of council.
Thank you very much for that, Mason. Pat and Jay?
Through you to Mason, would you put through a different time frame rather than 2 weeks then?
If it's okay, Councillor or Pat, I do have a motion on the floor being discussed for a 2-week deferral. If that isn't successful, then I will gladly entertain an alternative motion, either the original motion or option 1 or a different deferral date. So if it's okay, we'll continue to discuss the 2-week deferral. Any further discussion? I think I had Jay.
Thanks. Through the chair, I had initially wondered about waiting until next summer to address this because of the COVID-19 situation. This morning, I did reach out to some of the residents that had been directly involved with this issue prior, and asked them, do they think this is something that we can put off till next summer? And they really stressed to me that they thought it should be addressed immediately. Of course, whatever deferral council decides to go with, I'm happy to keep working on this. But my immediate inclination was to address this for this summer. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Seeing no other hands in the air, and still seeing that, I will now call the question on a motion to defer, verbal motion to defer this till May 4th. All in favor? That is defeated. So Mason, did you have an alternative motion?
Sure, through you, Mayor Clark, I'd like to put a deferral out. I think 6 months is okay. If it's something does come up, let's say, tomorrow this whole, pandemic's over, which would be wonderful. We can always bring that up sooner with the council report.
Okay. So 6-month deferral, do we need to pick a specific date?
Through you, Mayor Clark, yes, ideally, so that staff know when to place this back on an agenda, I would recommend that we postpone to a specific date. Here in Councillor Ainsworth, his time frame of 6 months would take us to October, November. So if there's a preference there, we could have a postponed motion to defer the motion until that time frame.
So we're going to pick a specific date within the time frame?
Mayor Clark, yes, that would be correct.
Do we want to take a moment and do that now, or that'll just pop up back on an agenda in that time frame? I think if it's approximate, that's probably okay.
Mayor Clark, if I may, so there is a council committee date currently scheduled for October 19th. So if council is fine with that, that could be the postponement date, and that this motion will be placed on that agenda.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor moved by Mason to postpone to October 19th. Is there a seconder? Pat, are you seconding or? Okay, Tim, I got it as a seconder. Pat, I'll come back to you. You sounds like you have a question. Okay, so I got a motion on the floor to defer to October 19th. I'll now entertain discussion on that potential postponement. Pat.
I'm suggesting we might want to do September rather than October because we're getting awfully close to budget.
Yeah, I'm seeing from staff that October night, it's a good consideration, but I'm understanding from staff that October 19th is not problematic, even with budget looming on the horizon. Thank you for that. Any further discussion? I will now call a question on a motion to defer till October 19th. All in favor? That has passed. So it's alive, Jay. Okay, we have a motion an item under departmental reports rather. As people may be well aware, I know council and staff certainly were, that we were going to host in 2021 what is known as the OSM Conference. I call it the Awesome Conference. It's the Ontario Small Urban Municipalities Conference. This year was supposed to happen in Brant County because of the COVID crisis. That has been canceled for this year. And therefore, the motion on the floor, the motion in the report reflects, I think, a decent move to Brant County to allow them to jump back in and host in 2021, and the city of Orillia to offer to then host instead of 2021, 2022 would be the year. So I will ask the motion now to be put on the screen, and I'll be looking for a mover in a second. I'll give you a moment to read through that. Then I'll ask for the motion to be removed so that I can see members of council. All right, Robin, thank you very much. Is there a mover and a seconder for that? Dave and Mason. Moved by Dave, seconded by Mason. Thank you. That this committee recommends the council that as recommended in report BDC 2001 dated April 14th, 2020 from the Business Development and Communications Department, staff be authorized to notify the Ontario Small Urban Municipality or OSM Executive Committee of its interest to host the 2022 annual conference as a result of the cancellation of the 2020 OSM conference due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have the fortune of having one of our staff members that is part of that executive committee. Well, I'm not sure if on the executive committee, but he's certainly on the OSM board, and that's Councillor Ainsworth. Okay, any further discussion? Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be supporting this. I think it's a great opportunity for Aurelia to host 2022 for two reasons. One is we'll be hopefully, and pray to God that we'll get over our virus problem, COVID-19 problem that we have, pandemic. And this will be a good tourist draw and a good economic booster to our economy in that time. And it gives us an opportunity to recoup from this before we host something of this nature. So I will be supporting that.
Thank you, Ralph. Further discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. I'm not aware of any inquiries, staff and council. I'm wondering, Councillor, are you okay if we hold announcements till our meeting right after this, so that we aren't repeating ourselves? Is that okay? If anybody feels strongly differently, put your hand up and you can do your announcement now. Okay, Ralph, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just wondering, I was going to ask if a moment of silence for people that passed away at Nova Scotia, especially the RCMP officer, that moment of silence. Would you rather do it at the council meeting or maybe after this meeting?
Well, the council meeting is right after this meeting, but you do bring up a good point. So I think we'll take advantage of the moment of silence at the beginning of the council meeting and certainly pay our due respects and reflections. And thank you for that. Open public forum, Ms. Williams, are we aware of anything?
No, Mayor Clark, I have not received any submissions.
Thank you very much. In that case, I will ask for a motion to adjourn so that we can reconvene. Moved by Mason, seconded by Pat. All in favor? Carried. We'll see you how about quarter two? You have 10 minutes to do whatever you want to do in 10 minutes. As long as you're physically distanced. We'll see you soon. Thank you. including myself. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We are missing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Who are missing? Dave. Oh, there were Dave representing the whole city of Orillia.
Mr. Muggs.
That's good. All right, I will call this council meeting to order. And if staff would be so kind as to miraculously put on O Canada for us, we'll stand for that.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love, in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
And that our hearts and thoughts do go out to those directly affected and everybody that have been affected in Nova Scotia and beyond. As we did just a few moments ago, would somebody please be so kind as to make a motion to approve the agenda? Moved by Dave, seconded by Mason. Thank you. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Any disclosures of interest? Seeing none. No presentations or deputations at this time. With respect to the minutes from our April 6th regular council meeting and April 15th, 2020 special council meeting regarding proposed emergency measures, would somebody make a motion to have those accepted? Moved by Dave, seconded by Tim. Any discussion, errors or omissions? I'll call the question. All in favor? Carried. Thank you for that. Correspondence item. We'll put the motion on the screen, please. Do you have the paper copy I can read, and then I can just fill out the names? I think, Megan, you should leave it on the desk, and then just. Thank you. The motion is on the screen in front of you. I'll give you a moment to read it. Okay. Is there a mover and a seconder to put that on the floor for discussion? Moved by Ralph. No seconder. Okay. Oh, sorry, Jay, are you seconding? Yes, okay. Yeah, I would. Moved by Ralph, seconded by Jay, that further the correspondence dated March 23rd, 2020, from the town of Midland, the city of Orillia supports the town of Midland's proposal regarding the direct payment of federal funds to municipalities to waive property taxes for the year of 2020 to alleviate the suffering from the COVID-19 pandemic. And that a copy of this resolution be forwarded to the Right Honorable Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, Mr. Bruce Stanton, MP, Simcoe North, to the Honorable Jill Dunlop, MP, Simcoe North, the Honorable Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, the Honorable Doug Downey, Attorney General of Ontario, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and all Ontario municipalities. Discussion. Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the motion is at no cost to the city of Aurelia, but it would be the motion's appropriate to help the citizens of our community that need assistance. And I think both the provincial and federal government have to help and come to the table with financial assistance. If this motion goes through and the federal and provincial government support the Midlands motion, it's no cost to the city of Aurelia other than the administration part of it. And what had happened, Mr. Mayor, we assist all other countries as well as, and I believe we should, but I also think we need to help our own citizens here and locally and in the city of Aurelia and also surrounding areas. So I think it's really appropriate that we support this motion to go forward, and hopefully the federal government and the province will come through with some kind of assistance. I'm not particularly fond of the percentages, but I think if they come through with funding, hopefully they'll give the municipality the authority to make those percentages a little more equitable. Because if you see, did a little bit of research, and the assessments within the city of Aurelia are ranging somewhere between 350 to 600 average and 1,000. So I think we really need to look at the percentages, but I think this supporting this motion will help hopefully the federal and provincial government to come to the assistance of municipalities that need to do something for their citizens within our community, as long as it's at no cost to the municipality, so that we have the revenue coming in from the federal and provincial government. So I would really like your support on this to forward the Midland motion to the appropriate government agencies. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Just, I know that Council is aware that there's an economic recovery task force that was asked to form by the emergency committee, and they will be coming forward with recommendations where they see that the city of Orillia can be involved in certain measures. So my understanding is that will be coming forth in the next week or two as well, just as an FYI. Pat, you had your hand kind of halfway up there. Did you wish to jump in?
I think it sounds great in principle, but I think it's totally unrealistic. First of all, for landlords that are rental properties, how do we know that they're going to pass this on to their tenants, and how would it be enforced? We have no way of doing that. And secondly, for people that have mortgages, most mortgages are PIT, principal, interest, and taxes. So people have already been paying the tax part of their mortgages for the first 3 months. it will take another month to probably have it enforced. So what do you do for the first three months? So I think to enforce it is rather problematic. So just the whole enforcement part, I think, is, or the whole getting it in place is rather difficult. I believe that the NDP had another suggestion, which was to give each citizen a monetary sum of $2,000, which they could put towards whatever, which is an awful lot easier to do than getting rid of the taxes all across the board. So I wouldn't be in favor of this.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Mason?
Through you, Mayor Clark, I will not be supporting this moving forward. I was quite shocked, to be honest, to see it in the CIP the other day coming out of Midland. Won't support it for numerous different reasons that I could touch on, but I don't want to go into to depth on all of them. But essentially, this is something that's not going to happen. And if they do it for Midland and Aurelia, they're going to have to do it for every other municipality in Canada, and it's just not feasible.
Thank you very much, Mason. Ted?
Always takes me a while to get started here. Thank you, Mayor Clark. You are correct. The Recovery Task Force, Economic Recovery Task Force, met this morning for several hours, and will be bringing recommendations forward in time for the Emergency Task Force to review them, and hopefully to review them subsequently with Council in the next week or so. So that is happening. But with respect to this particular request, I get really irritated when people in the city come to me as a councillor and say, well, why doesn't the city support that? What they're really asking for is the city taxpayers to support that, because we don't have money independent of what we tax for. Well, the same thing at the provincial level and the federal level. And our federal government is putting debt in Canada into the hundreds of millions of dollars to assist people during this pandemic. And they're making decisions to assist those who have the greatest need. There's a significant percentage of our citizens whose income stream has not been touched at all by this pandemic. There are many that it has, but not all of us are in the have a need here. And measures such as the one that Midland's talking about treats everybody equally. And it's an extremely a gross and unfair way to use the limited dollars that are available now, and which we're going to have to pay back in the future, whether it's city money, provincial money, or federal money. So asking the federal government, as Councillor Ainsworth has said, to top up hundreds of millions of dollars to pay for the cost of municipal services across this country is just a no-go. That won't work. We are going to present some things to you in the next through the Emergency Task Force, which will in fact potentially allow council to decide whether they want to invest any city resources in helping at this time. We're also doing a number of things that are not requiring city resources, but are working with other groups in our community and provincial groups to take advantage of money funding sources that are already available to us. So I am not in favor of this, and as I believe this did not receive the support of County Council last week when it came forward. There was a strong argument that this was not an appropriate strategy for the Zicoat County area.
Thank you very much. Any further questions, comments? Ralph?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recovery must be just and fair and equitable for all. Okay, and also, Ted, the task force has to be equitable and fair for all. If you look what the federal government is doing, they're lending $40,000 to businesses, and if you pay it back within a year, you get to keep $10,000. Okay, so where's that help the citizens of this Orillia or any other municipality where they haven't worked, they own a house, and they can't pay the mortgage or whatever it is that they have? This is one way of doing it, but some municipalities, as long as it doesn't cost our municipality any dollars, doesn't matter where that money is spent from the federal government. I know it's our own tax dollars, but like I said, we're contributing billions of dollars overseas and everything else, but we're forgetting about the people that actually live in a community such as Orillia and work their heart out to pay for their houses and pay for their mortgages so that they can own a house. So, but anyways, I think it would be up to the federal government to come up with something for homeowners, whether it's this or something else. Something has to be done because there's quite a few people that had to leave work and can't afford it. So whether it's this or your task force debt, you have to be fair and equitable to all, not just certain segment of our population. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Certainly, there are a number of measures beyond just the CEBA. I believe the acronym is the loan opportunity for small and medium-sized and nonprofit enterprises. There is certainly the CERB, which went out to anybody who had a significant loss of income or job loss, at least as a temporary measure. And we're certainly waiting to hear from the federal government on some other assistance programs that they've announced that will be taking place. We just have not heard the details yet. And certainly within the city, to the degree that we are able to, I'm sure that we'll be investigating meaningful ways that we can address areas of need. And that's coming up shortly, I would think. Any further questions, comments, discussion? Okay, so the question, does anybody want the motion reread with respect to the letter of support or the support for Midland? Okay, I will now call the question. All in favor? That is defeated. Make it afterwards. Oh, I know. Okay. So alternatively, based on the discussion that I've heard around the virtual council chamber, I would suggest that a motion to receive this information as information might be appropriate. Is there a mover and a seconder for that? Moved by Mason, seconded by Ted, that the correspondence dated March 23rd, 2020
was not a move.
with respect to a proposal regarding the direct payment of federal funds to municipalities to waive taxes for the year of 2020 to alleviate the suffering of from the COVID-19 pandemic be received as information. Any further discussion? Any discussion on the motion to receive? Mason.
Yes, through Mayor Clark, just a question. Haven't we already received this information as we got it through our CIP? Or is this the formal process to, officially receive it?
I believe what happened, and I'll get our clerk's department to tell me if I'm wrong, but anytime we have our CIP, it is within any councillor's purview to pull an item, a member of council's purview to pull an item and bring it forward to council. I believe that's what happened in this case. You're right, though, because normally we would just receive it as information in the CIP, but in this case, I believe Councillor Cipolla asked for it to be brought forward to council for formal consideration. Any further discussion on the motion to receive as information? I'll call the question. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. All right, we have one item under consent agenda, and I will ask. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Sorry, so we also have a motion that to capture the items that we discussed in our previous council committee meeting, which took place slightly earlier today. And I will ask for that motion to be put on the screen. And it's basically the items that we discussed over the last hour or so in council that were moved forward for ratification at this particular meeting of council. That motion be adopted to encapsulate those motions that we discussed earlier. So is there a mover and a seconder to put that on the floor? Moved by Mason. Thank you, Mason. Seconded by, sorry, I just can't see the screen right there. Thank you, Dave. Any further discussion on that motion? Thank you. All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. I do want to thank the staff, some of the staff for being here today. As you can see on your TV, that we're well spaced. It'd be awfully lonely if they weren't here. And now we go to reports. Sorry, we go to motions with our director, general manager of development services and engineering with us today. What I think I will do is ask for the motion to be put on the floor. Then I'll ask Mr. Sugden to introduce the discussion, if that's all right. So the motion will be popping on the screen in front of you. There it is. I will give you a moment to review it. It's got some content. Everything Mr. Sugden touches has good content. Kind of the Midas of the information world.
If I can, through you, Mayor Clark, I'll just begin perhaps while council members finish reading it. It is a lengthy motion. It reflects the fact that this is a follow-up report to the statutory public meeting that council held on January 20th, 2020 to consider three different types of applications: a draft plan of subdivision, a draft plan of common elements condominium, and a zoning bylaw amendment, all affecting 39 and 41 Orchard Point Road for a proposed condominium townhouse development on that site. As council will recall, there were a number of people that showed up to participate in that public meeting. A total of 4 of them spoke to provide their comments to council on the proposed applications. One issue identified by staff and was addressed in the initial report were the differences between the applicant's traffic impact study findings and the city's traffic impact study findings, because we had coincidentally done a study of our own of the Orchard Point and Aurelia Road intersection. As a result of the peer review completed subsequent to the public meeting, both engineering consultants have agreed that the city's traffic data utilized actual traffic counts that were 20% less than the applicant's engineers' projected counts. So in other words, the engineering consultants had agreed that the projected numbers used by the proponents' engineers had overstated the traffic counts, and our counts were more reliable. As a result, the applicant's traffic impact study now echoes the city's findings for the Orchard Point Road, Aurelia Road intersection, insofar as both conclude that signalization of that intersection is not warranted until 2026. So as a result of that peer review, the conditions of draft plan approval now exclude what was originally included as a potential condition to have the MTO consent to the signalization of that intersection. And that's primarily because the time limit on draft plan of subdivision is 3 years, and we can't extend conditions beyond that point. So it takes it outside of the working time frame on that. There was a comment made by a member of the public with a concern about how this development may impact wells in the area. So we have included a new condition in the conditions of draft approval for council's consideration that would require a well impact assessment So a private well impact assessment to make sure that they see what the baseline condition is before development occurs and monitor it during construction to make sure there's no impact to wells. As a result of comments received by residents, the applicant's consulting planner and city staff also spent further time reviewing the proposed site plan and determined that additional modifications are required to reflect the details of the proposed development and to address the concern of another resident with respect to fence heights. Those revised regulations have been incorporated in the draft zoning bylaw amendment. And as a result of changes being made after the public meeting, in which case their staff are of the opinion they're minor and reflect improvements to the bylaw, council needs to turn its mind to the provisions of the Planning Act and make a decision as to whether or not further modifications to the draft zoning bylaw amendment require an additional public meeting. Sections 3417 of the Planning Act give council the authority to make that type of decision. And so that's incorporated into the draft motion that's before council this evening. Finally, the Planning Act does not allow for minor variances to be considered within 2 years of the passage of a zoning amendment. So the motion includes specific authorization by council to permit variances within that 2-year time period in such instance that the developer finds the need to make that application. It would still go through its own public process, but they may find when they get to the detailed design and construction rendering time period that they may require variances. And then the last thing I wanted to point out is regardless of whatever decision council makes on this draft motion and the bylaws that are on the council agenda later this on the agenda, there is a provincially declared state of emergency, and as a result of that, a number of legislative changes have been made since this application was first brought before council. And additionally, the province has also temporarily suspended all judicial and quasi-judicial proceedings, and that would include the local appeals planning tribunal or local planning appeals tribunal. And as a result, after council makes its decision on these applications, the statutory appeal period cannot commence. So although our decision-making time period may be finished, we can't start the clock on the appeal period until the province lifts its state of emergency, at which point then applications, appeals periods will commence and the 20 days will start from then for which people then can lodge any appeals. That's all for the introduction, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much for that.
Can't hear you, Steve.
Well, I'd like to say that's the first time I've been speaking to the mute button over the last 5-6 weeks, but that's not the case. Is there a mover and a seconder to put this motion on the floor? Well, that garnered a lot more support than it did with a muted mic. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Eamon, seconded by Councillor Cloustra. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Rob. I will now wait for the paper copy and then I will read it. You'll bear with me. Thank you, Ms. Williams. Moved by Councillor Eamon, seconded by Councillor Cloustra, that further to the public meeting of council held on January 20th, 2020, council approved the draft plan of subdivision application number 43T-19002, Sophie's Landing Development Corp., 39 and 41 Orchard Point Road, subject to the conditions of approval dated April 20th, 2020, as set out in the Schedule B, of the supplementary memo dated March 20th, 2020, from the Development Services and Engineering Department, and that further to the public meeting of council held January 20th, 2020, council approved the plan of common elements condominium 43 CD 19002, Sophie's Landing Development Corporation, 39 and 41 Orchard Point Road, subject once again to the conditions of approval dated April 20th, 2020, as set out in Schedule C of the the supplementary memo dated March 20th, 2020, from the Development Services and Engineering Department, and that council approved the application for zoning bylaw amendment D14886, Sophie's Landing Development Corp., 39 and 41 Orchard Point Road, as amended following the public meeting of council held on January 20th, 2020, as set out in Schedule D of the supplementary memo dated March 20th, 2020, from the Development Services and Engineering Department. and that in accordance with subsection 3717 of the Planning Act, no further notice of amended zoning bylaw amendment is required to be given due to the minor nature of the changes that occurred following the public meeting of council held on January 20th, 2020, and that in accordance with the subsection 45, 1.4 of Planning Act, minor variance applications may be applied for before the second anniversary of the passage of zoning bylaw amendment 2020-30, with notwithstanding subsection 45, 1.3 of the said Planning Act. Is there any discussion or questions about this resolution? Ralph. Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So by us passing that through you to Mr. Sugden, what's that do to our request for traffic lights in 2016? And if the developer there would like to pay for them earlier, is it possible to be installed paid for by the developer and installed by a professional, either the city or MTO?
Mr. Sugden, I know this was a topic of conversation at our last meeting, but if you would be so kind, maybe, and I know you alluded to it at the introduction of this.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Clark. The previous council committee meeting, we presented the city's report on the traffic impact study that we had done for the Orchard Point Atherley Road intersection. That report concluded as well that signalization is not warranted until 2026, and the warrants in this case are related to level of service. And so I don't think or as stated in that presentation, it wouldn't make any difference if somebody is willing to pay for the intersection improvements or signalization at this point before warrants are met. As it is, we're having to work with MTO to try and move it forward for 2026 because of how they review those warrants. So at this point, it's a simple answer. It doesn't affect this approval does not affect the findings of our study and would not affect what we're asking of the MTO in this case.
Indeed. Thank you. Any further questions, comments regarding the proposed resolution? I will now call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. I understand there are no notices of motion this evening, nor deputation motions. We have an item on the consent agenda. Consent agenda, as folks will probably know by now from listening to my ramblings over the last number of years, it's often a series of items, not always a series, that are put into one motion, kind of like the council of committee. What's the council committee report that we do every time we have a council meeting? We lump those motions together and pass them as one. So Ms. Williams, if you'd be so kind as to present the screen, Robin, with the motion. So with respect to the item or items on the consent agenda today, that council adopt the recommendation as set out on the consent agenda for the regular meeting of council held this very day, April 20th, 2020. Is there a mover and a shaker, a mover and a seconder for, thank you, Mason. And Tim, thank you. Any further discussion on the consent agenda item? Ralph, go right ahead.
Thank you. Is this appropriate to bring this up? We were asked not to bring this up.
It's on the consent. That would be entirely your discretion.
Yeah, Ms. Jackson asked for this not to be brought forward.
So he said, he spoke, but I didn't hear what he had to say. Yeah. Yeah, I believe the recommendation is to receive it as information. Sorry, Ralph, you did say something there, but I didn't quite hear you. But the idea is to receive it as information. That's the motion.
Yeah, I thought I had an email. We had an email from Ms. Jackman that says not to bring it forward.
Sorry, what's that?
We had an email from Ms. Jackson that says not to bring it forward.
Yeah, well, I think the recommendation is just to receive it as information.
Okay, thank you.
Anyway, any further questions, comments, concerns? I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you very much. All right, we're into the bylaw section of the meeting. And the first one will be flashing up on the screen momentarily. And there it is. Is there a mover and a seconder to put it on the floor? Then I will read the copy once I receive the paper version. Sorry, Rob, I'm going to need to see the screens. Is there a mover and seconder? Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Ted. I think that'd be quite appropriate. Yes, please. Thank you, Robin. We'll display it again while you're well. That is not what I have. Okay. So moved by Pat, seconded by Ted, that the following bylaws be enacted: 2020-30, amendment number 80 to bylaw number 2014-44, the zoning bylaw for the city of Orillia, Sophia's Landing Development Corporation, 39 and 41 Orchard Point Road. 2020-31, a bylaw to amend chapter 64 of the city of Orillia Municipal Code Committee of Adjustment. 2020-32, a bylaw to amend chapter 105 of the city of Orillia Municipal Code Local Board Procedure. And 2020-33, a bylaw to adopt chapter 111 of the city municipal code Parking Advisory Committee. I'll get the faces back on the screen here. Any further questions, comments, discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Carried. And then for whoever it was, 5.5, 6 years ago, that asked me to declare whether the motion was successful or not verbally, thank you. I am still doing it. Next bylaw will pop up on our screen. With respect to bylaw number 2020-34, that bylaw number 2020-34, a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council held on this very day, April 20th, 2020, be enacted. I will now look for a mover by Dave and a seconder by Mason. Any further discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Carried. Announcements. So at the last meeting, I asked you if you'd be so kind as to withhold your announcements until this meeting so that we weren't repeating ourselves, and now is your opportunity to do just that. Well, I will take this opportunity to kind of reiterate something I did say earlier, so it kind of gets away from the theme of not repeating ourselves. Just a couple of hours ago, sitting at this very desk, I got word that my lovely daughter is in the hospital and underwent a procedure to allow her to have our second grandchild. We do not know the gender yet. They're waiting until she comes to and is coherent to share in the joy of the announcement. So anyway, I will certainly share that with the public. A nice, interesting activity during a relatively, in some aspects, a dark time. We spent 5 or 6 weeks away from our grandchild, other than yelling to her over a fence. And so my wife and I were charged with actually having to take care of her today because mother and dad were in the hospital. And so anyway, thank you for listening to me go on and on there. Any other further, thank you, Gay. Any other further announcements? All right. Open public forum, Ms. Williams, did we receive anything? Thank you. Just a reminder, submissions may be submitted to mwilliams@aurelia.ca. It's mwilliams@aurelia.ca if you wish to get your question into open public forum. Now I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Mason, seconded by Pat. Thank you very much, one and all. We'll talk to you very, very soon. You'll get a recap of the day this evening. And sorry, Dave?
All in favor?
All right. Anyway, everybody be safe. Talk to you soon.
We didn't vote on adjournment.
Oh, no, that's what Dave's saying. Okay, sorry. We have a motion on the floor to adjourn. Apparently, following Robert's rules, we need to vote on those types of things. It shouldn't be new news to the chair. I will ask for a vote. All in favor? Thank you. Good night.